What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Mindful Hermit channel where we feature tarot interpretations and rare decks. We're going to do something a little bit different today, but before we start, I'd like to invite you to like and subscribe to my channel and like the video. Um, so let's begin. So, today we're going to be looking at the Justice card, and like I said, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're actually going to go in historical order, and we'll start with the Visconti deck. Now, they aren't quite sure if this is the exact depiction of the original Justice card, but they believe that it is very close. A lot of the Visconti deck was lost in time. But the first thing I'd like to point out here is the scales. Now, the Justice card is assigned to Libra, and Libra is an air sign, so it's about how we think. It's about how we interpret the world through our mind. It's about how everything is mental substance in our reality. And you can also see the sword, which also represents intellect. Now, Libra is interesting because it's the only astrological sign that doesn't have, that is like an inanimate object. All the other astrological signs are people or animals or living things. Libra is the only sign that is an inanimate object and it scales. So that's the original, or they think the original Justice card. Next, we're going to move into the Marseille deck. And the cool thing about Justice is that it's pretty much has never changed in its design. It has changed positions. Some decks place it at 8, as you can see. Some decks place it at number 11. I personally like it better at number 11 because number 11 is balanced numerically. There's one and one on either side of the number. So it basically insinuates like a halfway point. Now there's this thing called the tarot tableau. I'm sure all you BOTA members know what I'm talking about. And in Justice, on the tarot tableau, Justice sits in the exact middle, diagonally, vertically, horizontally, numerically, everything. And it makes sense because Justice represents balance at the end of the day. So if we place it at number 8, yeah, okay, 8 is horizontally balanced. You can fold it in half, blah, blah, blah. 4 and 4, two sides of stability, okay. But 11, in the flow of the tarot, is exactly in the middle. So this is the Picard tarot. It came out in the late 1800s, early 1900s. I'm not quite sure, but it was lost for a really long time, and somebody actually found it recently, I think in the past like 20 years, and it was colored. So moving on. Now we're going to get into the Rider-Waite. Now, this is when we can really start to talk about what's going on in the card, because the Rider-Waite is basically the basis of all of tarot from the early 19th century on, and this was A.E. Waite's best work and most influential thing he ever created in his life. So first, I want to bring awareness to the two pillars, and if we kind of use our imagination, we have 1 and 1. Now, there's only a few characters in the major arcana that sit in between two pillars. It's Justice, the Hierophant, the High Priestess, and if you kind of think about it, the Animals and the Moon card sit in between the two pillars. So 11 is, if we add 1 and 1, it equals 2. So Justice and the High Priestess have a lot in common, and they're connected in a very esoteric way, and I'm going to lay it out for you right now. So the High Priestess represents the 7 Hermetic laws. Now, the 7 Hermetic laws represent rhythm, periodicity, gender, what's another one? basically they all represent like movement and duality. Now, there can be no movement unless there's a force in the middle of something that pushes it forward, okay? Now, expansion and contraction are essentially the basis of the 7 Hermetic laws. There's expansion in masculine force, contraction in feminine force, rhythm, there's expansion and contraction in sound, there's expansion and contraction in periodicity. Okay, the moon expands and then it contracts back, you know, expands into a full moon, contracts back. Now, there's some force that's pushing all of this forward, and it's justice, or as Aleister Crowley likes to call it, adjustment. And it's the push and pull, or the duality between the two forces, expansion and contraction, rhythm, periodicity, masculine, feminine force, okay? Even another Hermetic law is everything is made of mental substance. Okay, well, there's also spiritual substance. There's also etheric substance. Spiritual and etheric substance are pretty much the same thing. And they're constantly pushing and pulling each other in and out, you know. They're constantly migrating away and towards each other. Think about it like the yin-yang, okay? And you'll see the yin-yang in another card coming up here. But the scales are constantly moving back and forth, trying to reach some type of balance. And justice is what pushes those two things forward, and that is why it sits in the middle of the tarot tableau. So let's move on. Here's the BOTA version of justice, and it's not that much different, but what we do have here is the number, and we have the Hebrew letter, which is Lamed, which is the ox goad, and it basically represents, or means, the harnessed ox, the ox that has a plow attached to it. Now we can draw deductions towards the Fool. Now the Fool is super consciousness, and our material world is constantly being pushed and pulled between this like super conscious force that permeates all dimensions and all realities. And so because we are living in the material world, we have harnessed, or kind of trapped in a weird way, that ox power, that infinite thing that moves everything forward. Okay. Another detail I'd like to point out here, very subtle, her hand is facing inward, while in the AE weight deck, her hand is facing outward. I actually prefer the AE weight card to this one. I know some of you guys are hardcore BOTA fans out there, but to each his own. Now we're going to move, as like I said, I'm trying to go in chronological order. I don't quite know the dates of these next two decks, but anyway, we have the Manly P. Hall Tarot. One thing I would like to point out, the Sphinx and the lion right there, okay? And Manly P. Hall kind of stuck to a more traditional tarot numerical sequence. He left it at number 8, okay? Like I said, I personally prefer it at number 11. You know, we all can have our own interpretations. Another thing I would like to point out is the time clock, which is interesting. The hourglass. And I think that's all we're going to talk about with this card. Next, we've got the... What is this deck called? Oh, no. I forgot what this deck is called. A Thomson Lang Tarot. The Thomson Lang Tarot. And it's basically an AE weight rendition, except with a little bit less symbolism. You will see in a lot of these cards a yellow background, and that represents like that super conscious power, that like that one life power just basically the substance of spirit, the substance of ether. All right, now we're gonna get into actually one of my favorite justice cards. Now, I think that, and I don't usually teach from this deck. Okay, I don't usually teach from the Aleister Crowley deck. And you know, rip my head off if you want, but I think that Aleister Crowley had the best understanding of what justice really is. And now, if you read his chapter in the Book of Thoth on justice, or he likes to call it adjustment, he talks about how there's this infinite balance, this like weight that the material world holds down on the etheric world, and it creates like this balance. Now, if you look at his card, I personally, like I said, I personally think he had the best understanding of what this card actually meant. The Justice card is trapped inside of like a like chained, almost like diamond shaped cell. It's like a cell. Okay, now our material world is trapped down this like etheric substance that is literally creating everything that we live in. And the Justice card is basically represents that balance between etheric substance and the last thing that will ever be material reality. So we have the beginning and the end right here. And around it are these spheres of spiritual power, of, you know, soul energy that are coming down into this entrapped force, this entrapped ox power, this entrapped spiritual energy. And she basically is that force, that representation of that force. So what we have here is basically the eternal mind, which is represented by the sword, inseminating material form to become what is her cell of existence. Now, what makes this really trippy is that the etheric substance is permeating everything, and it's being bound down by the material substance. And she represents that material substance, while the sword, you can see here with the spheres, represent that ever permeating spiritual being. Okay. And we have the Trinity here, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, or Father, Mother, Son. And we have the connection between the High Priestess with the moons. And what it represents is that it's the balance between spiritual substance and material substance. And that will always be the first and the last thing that ever will be in our reality, as long as we are incarnated in the material world. So in a very small talk, that's essentially what this means. And I do think that he had the best understanding of what's going on with this card. Okay, so like I said, we have the yin yang force here. This is the New Hermetic Tarot by Godfrey Dawson. I believe it came out in the 80s, early 80s. Here we have the Libra symbol. And one thing that I really do like about this card is that Godfrey Dawson basically shows us that the powers of Venus and the powers of Saturn kind of balance each other. So like that eternal nature of spirit is balanced with that contractive force of our reality of the material world. And everything radiates from mental substance here. Now, the High Priestess is so intertwined with this card because she represents that mental substance that is everything. So here we have the daughter of the Lord of Truth. So justice represents truth. It represents showing truth through understanding balance. Next, we're going to look at Schick Cicero and Sandra Tabitha Cicero's uh, Golden Dawn Tarot. Yeah, Golden Dawn Tarot. And here we've got the balance between death and life. And here we have the pillars of the High Priestess, literally. And she's got the scales of justice over the light. I don't have much to say about this card. I do really like the fact that she puts the snake up here, or they put the snake up there, because snakes kind of have that vibratory motion, and they also represent that eternal electricity that runs through our reality. And they depict it really well, because if you think about it, like a snake that's slithering, it kind of like balances out, comes back, balances out, and it vibrates. And justice is constantly vibrating back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So basically the astral light that runs through everything, or the strength of our reality, is what justice is. Because if we think about it, electricity has a positive and a negative side, just like justice representing the two sides of the tarot. Last but certainly not least, this is a deck I bought recently, Tarot of the Holy Light. I don't necessarily agree with her astrological assignment of Cancer. She kind of interprets this card as more of a feely card. I don't necessarily agree with that. Yeah, our feelings kind of dip and dive and go everywhere. You know, we have ebb and flow of feeling sad, happy, happy, sad, depressed, not depressed. But that isn't a very mental thing. Now, we could argue that the basins of the scales are cups, and I could see why she would pull up, you know, justice as being the sign of Cancer, but it truly is the sign of Libra, because the overarching aspect of justice that's been there for hundreds and hundreds of years have been the scales. So I appreciate her work, but I don't agree with everything. We are missing the pillars here. And what I do like is kind of like the sigil in the background of all of the astrological signs, because those are all balancing each other. So that is one thing that I do really enjoy about this, and the growth that of the tree, because justice honestly represents, at the end of the day, the adjustment of karma, which is how we adjust our lives to actions that we've already made. So that is one aspect of justice. So anyway, I hope you liked the video. Please like and subscribe.